All right, let's jump right into this deep dive, shall we? We've got a whole lot to cover on Khada Jhin, and trust me, you sent over some seriously intense stuff.
Yeah, it seems like you really want to get to the bottom of who he really is.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got these Ionian folktales painting him as some kind of demon, then there's all this evidence he's just a man, but his crimes are just so...
Well, the less said about that, the better for my sleep, honestly.
You're not wrong there. What really gets me, though, is that this guy exists in this weird space between myth and reality, you know? You've got the stories, then you have the facts.
Yeah, and how do you even begin to separate the two?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Okay, so where do we even start? Those folk tales, man. I mean, you send over some seriously creepy stuff.
Like Ionian campfire stories on steroids.
Exactly, like
Yeah.
this golden demon snatching people from villages, leaving behind these scenes.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much is exaggeration and how much is go. Well, and you have to remember, for Ionia, Jinn is like the ultimate nightmare, right? This land where balance and harmony are everything, and then you've got this guy just wreaking havoc.
Totally. It's like he's the embodiment of everything they're terrified of.
Exactly. And so these stories, they're not just for kicks. They're how people process that fear, try to make sense of something that just doesn't fit into their worldview.
Okay, I get that. But even in these stories, there's this focus on how the victims were presented. Like, it's not just killing, it's art almost.
You notice that too.
Yeah, like even in the legends, you can see that seed of Jean's obsession, right? With the whole artistic thing.
It's definitely there. And that artful arrangement motif, it becomes a key clue for Kusho, Shen, and Zed later on when they're investigating.
Oh yeah, Master Kusho and his crew, spending years on this case.
Imagine chasing a ghost for that long, trying to bring peace back to Ionia.
You can practically feel Zed's frustration in those reports you sent. Like, with each year, he gets closer and closer to becoming the very thing he's hunting.
Well, for the Kinku Order, it's not just about catching bad guys, right? They're like the guardians of balance, protecting Ionia from all kinds of threats.
So for Kusho, this was more than just a manhunt.
Way more. It was about upholding everything his order stood for.
But then he starts to realize, the killer, maybe it isn't some mythical beast after all.
Exactly. There's this one line in Kusho's journals that just blew me away. He writes, "Good and evil aren't universal truths. They come from within us." And that changes everything.
Wow, yeah, that's a heavy realization.
Totally shifts the focus, right? Shen, always the dutiful son. He trusts his dad, even if he's wrestling with his own doubts. But Zed, well, he's seen the horrors firsthand.
So for him, Kusho's shift is just fuel on the fire.
He wants revenge, plain and simple.
And then they finally corner him on the eve of the Spirit Blossom Festival, no less. But it's not a demon, it's Khada Jhin, a stagehand.
I mean, talk about anticlimactic, right?
The monster everyone feared.
A guy devastating for Ionia, really. It shatters their sense of safety, forces them to face the fact that evil can come from within.
So they lock Jhin up in Tool, under constant watch.
But even behind bars, he's still creating. The prison records you sent are chilling.
Oh yeah, the guy's talented, no doubt, but there's just zero remorse. It's like he's still directing these horrible plays in his head.
Makes you wonder, what drives someone like that? Is it just sadism? Or is there something more, like some twisted message he's trying to send?
And then, bam, Noxian invasion. Ionia explodes into chaos.
And Jhin, he disappears.
Vanishes without a trace.
Some people think he had help. You know,
Well.
maybe someone saw an opportunity in the chaos.
But whoever it was, they didn't just free him, they armed him. Kashuri weaponry, top-of-the-line stuff, usually reserved for shadow plays.
That's what I find so unsettling. Someone's backing him, giving him the tools to, well, to be Jhin.
And that's when things get really scary.
Because now, Jin's staged.
Yeah.
It's the whole world. It's like he graduated from small-town theaters to the world stage, and his act, well, it's gotten a whole lot deadlier.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, right? Like, if those early killings in Ionia, those were some kind of twisted critique of their whole balance thing.
Right, like he saw it as stagnant.
Yeah, exactly. But then he goes beyond Ionia, so what's he critiquing now? The whole world.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What happens when your canvas is global? But to answer that, we got to look beyond just the killings themselves. We need to get into Jean's head, you know? Like, what's the deeper meaning behind all this?
You're saying there's a message in all this violence? I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, but think about it. For Jean, it's never just about the act itself. It's about the execution. the planning, the details, the way he weaves in Ionian art and theater, it's all part of some grand design.
Okay, so maybe you're right. Looking at everything together side by side, there are these patterns, these recurring themes. It's not just random chaos.
Exactly, like Piltover, for example. City of Progress, all shiny and advanced, right?
Right.
But who does Jhin target there?
The guys who made that progress happen, but at a cost. Industrialists exploiting workers, scientists pushing ethical boundaries.
Like he's saying, look at the dark side of your progress, Piltover.
Bingo. He's exposing the contradictions underneath that shiny facade.
And then there's Zahn, right? Piltover's underbelly, where the cost of progress is even more visible.
Kim Barron's augments the whole works. Jhin seems drawn to these places where society's cracks are showing,
Yeah, like he's poking at the weak spots, making them bleed.
He's using his actions like a scalpel, dissecting these societies, laying bare the ugliness they try to hide.
Okay, but if that's his goal, why not just, write a manifesto or something? Why all the theatrics, the violence?
Because Jhin understands the power of spectacle. Words can be debated, ignored, but actions, especially actions like his, they stick with you, force you to confront what you'd rather not see.
It's like he's holding up this messed up mirror, forcing us to look at the parts of ourselves we hate.
And the scary part is, it's working. Look at the changes Piltover made after his attacks, the investigations into Zone. Jin's shaping the world, whether we like it or not.
Okay, I get all that, but what about this vendetta against Zed and his order? That feels so personal, almost petty compared to all this grand social commentary stuff.
But I think you've hit on something crucial there. Remember, Zed was there that night. He was the one who saw Jin's face.
You think that matters to Jhin?
Absolutely. See, Jhin and Zed, they're two sides of the same coin, in a way. Both masters of their craft, both obsessed with control, but their methods completely opposite.
Zed's all about balance, keeping things in check.
And Jhin, he's all about disruption, pushing things to the breaking point. And by attacking Zed, Jin's not just getting revenge, he's challenging Zed's whole worldview.
Like your precious balance doesn't work in a world like this.
Exactly. It's a clash of ideologies, playing out on a global scale with real consequences.
This whole thing is way more complicated than I thought.
That's Jhin for you. He turns his life into this horrifying spectacle, and we're all caught in the middle, whether we want to be or not.
So knowing all this, what stood out to you the most? What really clicked for you?
What gets me is how Jhin weaponizes beauty. Ionian art, music, theater. He twists it all into these horrific tableaus. He understands that beauty can be just as dangerous as any weapon,
Yeah, there's this undeniable artistry to his work. But if he's trying to show us the ugliness of the world, why use beauty to do it?
Maybe that's the point, right? To show us how closely beauty and horror are intertwined, how order and chaos, they exist side by side.
Man, the more we talk about this, the more unsettled I feel. It's like peering into the abyss,
Yeah, it's like he's saying beauty and horror, art and violence, they're all just different threads in the same messed up tapestry. And it's kind of terrifying when you think about it like that, because where does it end? What's the final act in all of this? It's a question that keeps a lot of people up at night, I'm sure. What happens when your canvas is the world and your medium is terror? Is he working towards some grand finale, some horrific masterpiece that'll top everything he's done before? Or is this just the way it is now? A never-ending show of chaos and destruction.
I mean, that's the thing, right? You can't exactly sit down and have a chat with the guy like, hey, Jhin, maybe tone it down a bit. He's not exactly motivated by reason.
No, definitely not. Throwing him in a cell clearly didn't work, so what do you do?
Especially with the resources he's got now, it feels like trying to put out a wildfire with a water gun.
The old ways just might not cut it with someone like Jhin. He thrives on chaos, on breaking the rules, on doing the unexpected.
So how do you even stop someone like that?
Well, maybe the answer lies in understanding his art, his language, his process.
You're saying we need to think like Jhin to catch Jhin?
Maybe not think like him exactly, but we need to understand his moves, like a game of chess where each piece is placed to get a specific reaction.
But how do you predict the moves of someone who's playing by their own rules? Someone who sees the world as their stage and we're all just puppets.
It's definitely not easy. But Ionia, for all its focus on balance and harmony, it also has this deep tradition of shadow play, of understanding illusions and hidden meanings. There are people who have dedicated their lives to this art, and they might be able to see the patterns in Jin's work.
Wait, you're saying there are people who can decode Jism, like see the world through his eyes.
Maybe not exactly through his eyes, but they can recognize the symbols he uses, the references to Ionian myth and theater.
So maybe, just maybe, they could figure out his next target, his next move.
It's a possibility, at least.
So there's hope. We can actually stop him before he hurts anyone else.
There's always hope. But we have to change how we think about this. We can't just react out of fear and disgust. We need to be strategic.
Like we're analyzing a painting, but the paint is made of blood, basically.
Grim, but yeah. We have to look for the message, the meaning behind the horror. We have to dissect the composition, so to speak.
It's a terrifying thought, having to understand the mind of a killer to stop him. But I guess with Jin, there's no easy answer.
Nope, no easy answers here. And that's what makes all this research so important. You know, it's not just about gathering information, it's about broadening our perspective.
So after all this digging into Jin, what are your final thoughts? What would you say to someone else trying to make sense of him?
I'd say, never underestimate the power of art, even when it's twisted and dark. Jin's shown us that beauty can be a weapon, terror can be a show, but he's also shown us how strong we can be, how much we crave understanding, even when the world feels like it's falling apart.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you'd leave our listener with? Something to think about as they keep exploring Jin's world.
Remember, Jin is a master at manipulating people, at telling stories with fear and violence. But the story isn't over yet, the ending. Well, we get to write that. And maybe, by understanding him, we can change how it all ends. But to do that, we have to stay sharp, stay informed, and always, always be one step ahead.